actually said this already. Who is this handsome man right here? Does anybody know? Mike? Mike Chang? Ike. That's correct. So this is Brandon Ike, right? Not to be confused with the lovable Brandon who sits right there, the senior program manager, who's the man. This is the father of JavaScript. So do you remember how long it took you to do your mod 1 and your mod 2 project? Like about a week? So like maybe 6-7 days? So he wrote JavaScript in about 10. It's pretty impressive. I know. It's like, yes, let's be senior developers so I can just do my own language in 10 days. Naturally, because of that, the language wasn't perfect, to say the least. I think I'll just sugarcoat that a little bit. And so when JavaScript first came out, it was not super popular. Naturally, because, I mean, you wrote a language in 10 days, and it's not going to get widely adopted, right? A language usually gets widely adopted once there are a lot of users to it. A lot of people contribute back to its open source because they like the way it looks or feels. And then ultimately, it gains enough popularity where a company will buy it and sponsor it. And that's when like a language will really kind of take off. Once there's like some significant sponsorship to it, because then they know it'll be reliable and they'll know that it will be sustainable because another company is pouring hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars into it, into sustaining it. Cool? So if you're like thinking about another language, like Crystal, for example, which is much faster than Ruby, but why do people not really use Crystal? It's because there's no like Rails version of Crystal, and there isn't a sponsorship for Crystal yet. And so it's there, you could play with it, you could test it, you could open issues, which would be great for you in your like budding developer journey. But until it gets sponsorships, it's not taken as like a serious language yet. Cool? All right, JavaScript. Can you see this? Let me just blow this up a little bit. Oh man. Just the text, We're gonna get away from his very handsome face. Cool. So it is based on a multi-paradigm. What that means is what you've learned in Ruby is object-oriented programming. So everything has a class. Do you remember when Mike took you out of string land and he brought you into object-oriented land? And you started creating objects for everything. So you can access the attributes of every single object. And there's a lot of this shared data. That's object-oriented programming. Functional programming, and we'll get into it, there's a different lecture on it, is just going to focus on what the application does, defining functions and methods, strictly on what it does, and less focused on the shared data of your application. That is a very abstract definition. So if it doesn't make too much sense right now, that's okay. Just walk away knowing that JavaScript can be written and should be written in more than one way. Cool, does that make sense so far? Like it's not just everything is a class like it was, or everything is an object like it was in Ruby. All right, we'll learn more about that. The reason JavaScript picked up is because, let's take a look at a very cool website. All right, let's see this. You've seen this website before, Airbnb? Cool. Do you see those like 3 dots that were right there? Let's just go, where do you guys want to go? Hawaii? Hawaii. All right, what I want you to focus on is what is on the page. Let's go for one day. Let's just go for a week. Let's go for a month. Let's bring everybody. All right, just bring everybody. 14? 16. Wow, they upped it up. Cool. Yeah. Well, and then we have infants, right? We have 21 people going on this trip. Cool. All right. What I want you to focus on is when I click this, take a look at what renders on the screen, and then ultimately how fast it gets painted to the page, but more specifically, if you see anything load. Cool? Cool, right? So, oh. Well, there's only 2 homes because it was obnoxious. All right, let's just go this way. Cool. Let's get rid of all the guests. Let's just clear this out and say there's going to be 2 adults. See this? Did you see that? Let's take a look at when I scroll to the bottom. Ooh. Did you see that? And how it wanted to load. So in your Rails app, who's kind of like frustrated where every single thing required a full page refresh? Who enjoyed that user experience? Who was like, this is the greatest user experience ever? Cool. Let's take a look at, I think I have Twitter in here. I think it's like Coffee Dad, right? Twitter, Coffee Dad. Coffee meets bagel. Cool. And so if we take a look here, oh, this is sorry, just quick introduction. This is like a long-running Flatiron joke. I think this is a bot. It's just like someone that like, comfy time, very good. Having a coffee, want coffee, hashtag after, very good. So if you take a look at this scroll bar here on the right, look what happens when I get to the bottom. Did you notice? There's like that little like circle loop there. And then more get added to the page. Notice how it didn't trigger that full page refresh. I was able to get more data onto the page without doing a full page refresh. And in today's day and age, right, I did not have to reload this nav bar. I didn't have to reload this image. I didn't have to reload how many tweets, followers, or likes that I had. I didn't even have to reload any of the old stuff. I simply got 10 or 15 more tweets from the database, and then I added them to the page. This is really useful because, one, the user experience is much nicer, right? Instead of having to click next every single time, right? Like, who has been on a website where they do that, right? Click next every time. Oh, I don't know. You're just like looking at something, and you're like, great. Google does it, right? Yeah, I know. You guys don't know because you never go to page 2, right? When you go to page 2, it's a real conundrum. So the experience is that I can simply make another request, get data, and then add it to the page. Going back to why JavaScript was popular was when Google Maps and Gmail first came out. It was so nice. It was like revolutionary that you can keep your Gmail open, and then it would make these requests to see, hey, do I have more mail? And then it would add that mail to my page. As opposed to having to, every once in a while, you can imagine if you're in an office job, where you're like, great, do I have any mail? You literally go to your desk and hit refresh and be like, great, no new messages. None of this AOL, you got mail kind of nonsense. Does that make sense so far? And so because it was able to make these requests without this full page refresh, that the language got really popular. And that's kind of like that whole story. So thank you, Gmail, for making JavaScript what it is today. Back in the day, does this look familiar to anybody? Yeah? Cool. If you said no, don't worry. I'm not going to hold it against you. Although I will be making a lot of like old people jokes. Cool? And by old, I mean like old for tech. Like I'm in my 30s. I'm basically a grandpa. So I was around in like AOL 1.0 days. So, yes, right, yeah. Blockbuster was a thing, all right, cool. So, as you can imagine, when you run your JavaScript, each browser had different ways of executing your JavaScript, which is weird because imagine you had that in Ruby. Imagine you ran .map and it worked differently on somebody else's computer than it did on yours. That's sort of the analogy I want you to think about. It would be like, great, it iterates through, but let's say on yours, it returns a new array, but on somebody else's, it mutates the array destructively. It doesn't return a new array. You'd be like, okay, that's frustrating. You can see that it's doing the same thing, but it does it a little bit differently. And because of that, there would be a different user experience on each of these browsers, right? Who remembers this? Let's take a look. I pulled it up already. Do you remember this over here? Best viewed in Netscape Navigator. This is like a thing back in the 90s where you would want to use a particular browser because it worked. If you remember back in the day, who said that, oh, hey, I'm going to go on this website, but you have to use Internet Explorer. It doesn't work on the other browsers. It doesn't work on Firefox. It doesn't work on Opera. It doesn't work on BlackBerry. I don't know what they called it, the browser. And you had to use Internet Explorer, right? The government still does this. It's very like dated technology. They don't even use Edge. They're like, great, I need you to access your secret documents. Please go to Internet Explorer. You're like, it's deprecated. but sure. Either way, the whole point is that it would become really confusing, and the browser wars began where it was like, hey, let's use Netscape Navigator because I like the way JavaScript runs in it. Or a different developer would only develop for Internet Explorer. And so it was weird because the language is sort of the same, but at the same time, it executed a little bit differently. And so naturally, the internet got together and this council was formed where they were like, hey, I need to make sure that when I write some JavaScript, it works the same in every single browser to create a unified user experience. So you don't see this anymore. Best viewed in IE, best viewed in Netscape Navigator, best viewed in Chrome. This feature only works in whatever, which is kind of a thing today, but still. That's browser wars too. That's like the next gen browser wars. The thing is, right, it's something called the ECMA, European Computer Manufacturer Association, and they're responsible for standardizing all of JavaScript. So the newest version of JavaScript that we will be learning is ES6, or what is known as like Harmony, and that is going to be ECMAScript 6. That's what ES6 stands for. It came out in 2015. There has been revisions and additions to feature sets every year thereafter. So there is like a ES 2016, ES 2017, and ES 2018. And there are new features in JavaScript every year that are added. We'll be focusing primarily on ES5, which is like the standard before ES6, which came out before 2015, and ES6. Because ES6 is the borderline where everything became known as modern JavaScript. So beforehand, you didn't have all of the sexier features that you have today. So there's a lot of syntactical sugar that ES6 adds that makes it look a lot more like Ruby or Python. So it becomes much easier for somebody to walk into and start programming in JavaScript. Cool? Great. Talked about the browser words. All right. Before we get into any JavaScript, let's just review this request response cycle and how it is that it affected like what we saw at Airbnb or Google or Twitter. All right. Does anyone want to like walk me through this? The diagram is pretty simple. Okay, great. I will do it. So the user goes on a website, right? And they basically go to either google.com, Airbnb, and they request information. It is a GET request, right? You know this. And then it sends information to the server, hits your routes, check to see which controller action you want, if you need anything from the database, and then it sends a response. And that response goes over the internet, right? And then it comes back to your computer and you download that HTML. So far, so good. And then the user, through the browser that has the HTML, the browser, Chrome, knows what to do with HTML and then paints it to the screen. And so you see your website. That is the whole request response cycle. So far, so good? Just quick thumbs up. I know I've been talking for a little bit. Well, I don't want you to go to sleep. I'm boring. Hello. So what we can do is instead of this full page refresh this whole time, what we can do is we can listen for certain things that can happen. So for example, if the user, instead of clicking on a link or hitting enter on a form, simply scroll to the bottom. If the user scrolls to the bottom, then make another request, get the next 10 tweets, and then send back the 10 tweets. But what do I do with those 10 tweets? I'm just going to add them right onto the page. And that's done through JavaScript. And so that's part of what JavaScript does in this request response cycle. Does that make sense so far? And so what we're trying to do is Python has something called Django, which is essentially like the Rails of Ruby. You're going to learn about React. There's JavaScript frameworks like Express and Node, where you can sort of build these websites in these different languages. So we needed, and by we I mean the council of the internet, I'm not on it, just we as developers, needed some sort of language agnostic way of sending data back and forth. Does anyone remember what that is? It's language agnostic. Everything is just a key value pair. Yeah, it's a JSON. right? So you can send over these key value pairs over the internet, and then it doesn't matter. Do you remember doing, like in Ruby, in your mod 1 project, like the REST client, and then you did rest.get, and then you did some sort of like URL here, and that essentially got the data from the server for you, right? And it comes back as a string. What happens when you do rest client.get? It gives you back a JSON object which you have to parse and then make it into Ruby readable. And so that's really about it, right? So JSON works for any language, and when you do the request response cycle, you can have JSON come back and then add those extra 10 tweets. That's sort of the idea. Don't worry about like understanding the mechanics of it. We'll be doing a lot of it in mod 3. Cool? Just like understand the flow. Does that make sense so far? Great. Let's do some JavaScript. Cool. Who remembers the data types in Ruby? Not all at once now. Just what are the data types in Ruby? I'll start you off. Ready? So there's string, right? Very good. There's fixed num, nice, nice. Float, right? That's a little tricky. So there's booleans, right? Very good. It's nil, nice. I know. It's hard to jump back and forth between languages, so I will try my best to kind of not confuse you. Hash is a different type object, right? And so here in JavaScript, here are the 7 main types of data, right? So the first thing I'm just going to completely gloss over. It's called a symbol. And I think you've seen this before in Ruby. You've done this a lot. And that is in your Rails, you had some sort of hash, right? So you had like hash equals this empty hash. And then hash at a key of awesome. Or something more familiar like flash at a key of errors. What does this right here indicate? It's a symbol, right? As opposed to what sometimes we use is flash at a key of errors, but errors is a string. Right? Rails does something called indifferent, and it allows you to use either the symbol or the string, but they are in fact different. So JavaScript has something pretty similar. It is newer, and there's a lot of weird quirks to it. So we will not be going too much into this, and you will not see this hardly ever, and you'll definitely not see this in the Flatiron curriculum. Just know that it exists and is used to get key value pairs out of like a hash. Or in JavaScript, we just call them objects. Cool? Great. So what is undefined? You did the labs, did the readings? Talk to me about undefined. Okay. I can tell that the lecture is going to be a little different in this mod. Cool. Yeah. There's no value. So let's just do var, right? I'm going to set up some variable, right? And I'm going to have var brook. And that is going to equal to, obviously, awesome. Obviously, right? So if I were to reference brook, I would simply get awesome. However, if I were to do var sebi over there, right? What is this equal sign doing? Right, I'm defining its value, I'm assigning it a value. If I just said, hey, I'm going to set in memory some sort of variable called sebi, but I have not assigned it a value yet, and I simply return it. And if I say, hey, what did I put as sebi? What was that again? It's going to tell me that, hey, you never defined this. It is undefined. However, undefined can be a little bit tricky. In the same way that, did I ever make this variable called ya boy? Did I do var ya boy equals to something? No. So if I reference it, it's going to say, uncut reference error, ya boy is not defined. A little tricky because people assume undefined and not defined are the same, but they are not. Cool? Words mean things. It's weird. Thank you for enjoying my snark, yes. I'm snarky, so it's just my type of humor. Especially when the class is loud and uproarious and really loves to give answers to class. No, it's cool.
It's Monday morning.
Cool. Great. So undefined, that is going to be the JavaScript transpiler reading all your variables and going, great, I'm just going to allocate some space in memory. So this reference exists as variable, but it has no value. And not defined is an error, as noted by this huge red block that looks bad. Cool? So are you comfortable explaining to your partner the difference between undefined and not defined? I just need a quick thumbs up. I'm not going to ask you to do it, but awesome. Good deal. What is null? That's exactly right. Very good. Thank you. Right, so it's very much like nil. I heard you as well. It's like nil, right? I'm specifically saying that this is going to have the value of essentially nothing. And not 0, but nothing. Why would I want null as like a value to exist, even though it points to nothing? Yeah, absolutely right. You're all correct in that. And so really what it is the JavaScript transpiler will automatically assign undefined to things that are undefined. You can, however, tell it, hey, I want to let you know I'm specifically giving this no value, because undefined is an indicator to us that we didn't define something. And so when we're writing our code, like I told you back on Friday, all those days ago, is you have to be very methodical in your JavaScript. So if you're getting back undefined, it means that you did not define it. If you're getting back null, you can understand that, hey, I put that there on purpose, and that is actually correct. And so it's an indicator to you to help you with your debug process, because the errors are not as beautiful as they are in Rails. Cool? Is that a decent explanation? Awesome. Cool. What is a Boolean? Right, if something is like true or false, right? Cool. What about number here? It's everything. It's everything. Ruby had broken them down into little batches for you, like integer, fixed num, and float. And big num, that's right, when it's like a certain amount of digits, right?
This also has like pi, b,
Math is math is different. It's like a constructor. So, but number is all of it wrapped up into one. Cool. So by default, that means that JavaScript will take all of your numbers and automatically have the ability to use the decimal value, as opposed to having to specify it as a float in Ruby. Cool. That's kind of like the main takeaway here.
Does infinity count as a number, or is that part of that?
Infinity is a number. And you know what else is a number? Not a number. Cool. We'll get to that in a second. Yeah, it's weird. All right, cool. String, right? I don't have to kind of go into this, just like text, right? And then lastly, something called object. So notice that we don't have hash and we don't have array. Cool. The array is a very special type of object in JavaScript. It's sort of faked so that it can look like a normal programming language, so to speak. Yeah. But everything else, not these 6, is an object. Cool? That's all you really need to know about that. Yes, sir.
But you still refer to arrays as arrays, not
Correct. Yeah, we will refer to them. When I put the square brackets, I'm going to say array. But just know that how the JavaScript engine understands them, they're technically objects. On the spot. Do you remember the dot class in Ruby? Cool. There is something called type of in JavaScript. So I can do what is type of, right? And I can say 3. Cool. Gives me number. Cool. And I can say what is type of this object, and I get object. So what is type of this array? Object. Cool. No, that was a very good point, and I'm glad Brooke said something. All right, this proves that the array is actually a special type of object. Cool. Great. So moving on. There's something called constructors and literals. We will get more into what a constructor is in the future. But something literal. Have you come across this before, or do you remember seeing what this is in Ruby? Who has an idea? Just, yes, sir. So that tag team, I like that partnership. What in your words it would be like some sort of like literal definition in the programming language?
Literal is
It's tough. It's tough. It's okay.
explicitly like defining something.
You're
nicer syntactic sugary way of defining.
absolutely. You are both defining and creating at the exact same time. Do you remember in Ruby I can just do something like array.new and then pass it in literally like a brand new array and then it would create it for me? Or I could just be real hacky and just go, great, 1, 2, and 3. This is an array literal, meaning I'm writing the syntax for array and I'm creating it right on the spot by just literally writing the brackets. In the same way that I did not have to do hash.new, I can do just this hash right here and then create key or lay value pairs. It's supposed to be key, but I have like fat, ugly fingers. Cool? So, now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's take a look at this code here. I have another num, and that's just equal to the value of 1. I have some num equals to this number, right, passing in 1 as the value. Cool? And then I have some new num, and that is going to be a new number. Notice how the syntax highlights differently. Also passing in the value of 1. If I do some new num, which is this like new number, and another num, which is a number literal, it's false. However,
Because 1 in some num is called to the new number.
I'll explain here in a little bit. However, some num, which you know is like number 1, right? And another num, which is like the number literal, evaluates to true. Let's take a look at this code here. Cool. So, why is... Oh, clown. Cool. So, right, I can do like let, right, the number 1, ugh, that's gross, equal to 1. So let's console log what number 1 is. It's just the value of 1. So far, so good. And then I can put this as well. I'm just going to grab that. And then I'm going to console log. You like that? Every student makes fun of me, and that's okay. And that's also num. So when I do this number 1, I'm just actually referencing this value of 1. But let's see what happens when I have this here. Right, would it be easier if I just put, right, like that new though? New number? Is that a little easier to read? Cool. So what is the console log of that new? So this number 1 and the actual value of 1 points to 1. However, a new number 1 gives me this number 1 object that has a primitive value of 1. I'll explain in 2 seconds. Yeah, same question?
No, I was going to ask you to do that the 2 equals instead of the 3 equals, or is this the same thing? Like the 3 or false value and true value, which is great.
Which one are talking about, like some num? Right, so some num. And you want a double equals to new number? Yeah, so here is the thing, right? If you remember in Ruby, right, I could do something like this. I can easily just do 7.4, and then on this number directly, because everything is an object in Ruby, right? And objects have methods, so I can just do dot round on it. I can call dot round on the number itself. I literally added dot round the method on the float, correct? Now, in JavaScript, however, it doesn't like that. If I were to put dot round, it doesn't understand I cannot call this method on this number because this number itself doesn't have any methods attached to it. However, this number object has all of these methods on it. So in order to get around that, I can do math.round and then pass in like a 7.7. So math.round is taking in an argument versus 7.7 dot round. It's a little bit different in JavaScript. Does that make sense? Because I can't check the methods on a number. Whenever I see the new keyword, just know that it's always going to build and construct a new object in memory. So every single time I do new number, new number, new number, I now have 3 different objects in memory. Who remembers doing in mod 1 when you did like squirrel.new and you passed in like a name, or tree.new and you passed in a name? What is the return value? What do you get? You get this like little like squirrel hashtag 07439K. You get that instance. That hash is the location in memory that exists. So if I did scroll.new with the name of Alvin, scroll.new with the name of Alvin, even though they both have the exact same attributes, they are 2 different instances, 2 different places in memory, and they do not equal each other. Does that make sense? And that's what's happening in JavaScript. Cool? Is that like, so far, if I see new, just new place in memory, new object. So far, so good? Quick thumbs up. All right. Great. This is where it gets wild. We're going to move a lot faster. I can see you're kind of bored. So I'm sorry. I'm just going to keep it mad real. So I'm going to, I don't know you guys yet. I will ramp up the speed. If I lose you, let me know. All right? I don't want to like bore you. Cool. String interpolation. In Ruby, you had to use the double quotes. There is literally no difference between the single and double quotes except for styling. Like if you want to style it a certain way in your app. My only recommendation is if you like single quotes, use single quotes in your app the whole way. If you like double, use them double the whole way. There's also some nuanced differences, but you could check the Airbnb style guide for what those are. But if you want to string interpolate, you get rid of the single or double quotes. You put the backtick, which is the key above tab. It's like the top leftmost key right under escape. And then you use this like sweet, sweet $, and then the curly brackets that you know and love in Ruby to interpolate. Cool? And this would be, this should not be quotes actually, it should be a variable. Any questions? Instead of a hash, you use the $, and you must use backticks instead of double quotes. It's the main difference. Cool? We talked about number. We want to talk about parseint real quick, and that is parseint will take a string and make it the number equivalent. The only weird thing about it is that it will stop once it sees letters or things it doesn't know how to make numbers. So I can do this, and it'll do 1, 2, 3. But if I did Coolio 7, it'll just say not a number. Because it'll read C as the first thing and be like, oh, C is definitely not a number. I can't do that. Sorry, dog. And then just stop. Cool?
So these are just built-in number methods.
They're not built-in number methods. Parseint is like part of like the JavaScript library. So you can do type of, and we can do not a number, and it's a number. Cool. All right, moving forward. Boolean values. What were the 3 things in Ruby that were falsy? Was it 0? Does anyone remember? Okay. Well, we're not teaching Ruby today. Just know that there are 3. But in JavaScript, there are 7. Cool? So false is false. Thank God. Right? 0 is false. Empty string is false. Null is false. Undefined is false, which is tricky because you will have undefineds by accident. And that will just return falsy. And then, of course, not a number is false. Everything else, if it is not listed here, is considered truthy. Cool? I will send this README out. It's going to be part of your code. If you feel like writing it down helps you remember it, by all means. But I will be moving forward. Cool? All right, here we go. This is the hardest part of JavaScript in understanding the base core of its language, and that is something called pass by reference and pass by value. So let's take a look. I can, in fact, do a var of, 7 equals to the number 7. Cool? So if I say, what is 7? It gives me back 7. So far, so good? It wasn't crazy. If I said var of 7 again, and I just made it equal to 7, what am I saying here? Right, I'm referencing the variable. So what is 7 again as a value? 7. So if I were to do 7 again, and I plus plus, who's seen plus plus before? All it is I'm just incrementing the number, right? So meaning, if I see 7 again, it's now 8. Cool? Can I do that? And then now it's 9. I'm just incrementing, right? Plus plus, like it's just like plus 1 to that value. What is 7? The original variable, right? It is not affected whatsoever. Primitives are passed by value. What that means is the value holds its own individual value for a variable. Nothing should be mind-blowing right now. I'm not sure what you're writing, but it should be exactly the same as you know it in Ruby. Yes, sir?
Is there any difference? I mean, I know that if you do plus plus before you call on the variable name, you just add it before you call again.
Yes. There is a difference. So plus plus, notice that it is after the number, right? And if I call plus plus, it will increment after it returns. So let's do this one more time. Ready? So 7 again, plus plus is 9. I get 9 as a return value, but if I check 7 again, it's 10. It's really 10. If I put it in front, it will increment it first, then return. So if I put plus plus 7 again, it'll actually give me 11.
Plus 7 again is the same thing as 7 again plus equals.
Yeah. Cool. So, shouldn't be crazy, right? Nothing wild. But objects, however, are passed by reference. If you learn nothing else today, objects are passed by reference. Objects are passed by reference. Objects are passed by reference. Cool? All right, here's where it gets weird. So, I can have a variable, right? And we just, does anyone have, is class creative? Kind of like objects do you guys like to build? You guys like Mike Chang, huh? Great. So I have this object, right? And I can have a key of cat1, creative AF. What, sugar? Someone said sugar? Sure, name, great. Name, sugar. Cool. Great. I can have a var, right? The powerful Mike Chang, right? Equals to cats. Cool? And if I take a look at Mike Chang, I see the exact same object. I just sort of like made this point to the same place in memory. What I mean by that is, if I were to do Mike Chang, and I were to add a new key and say powerful, and that is obviously true. So if I take a look at Mike Chang again, I see name and powerful. But let me take a look at cats real quick. Who can explain this to me? As something like a phenomenon.
So whereas when you're doing the 7 and 7 again, the specific value is what we're dealing with, when we assign it to a variable, here we're dealing with the object which is passed by reference.
So the same place in memory.
Exactly. So let's do awesome web app. Cool. Do you guys use this at all? Cool. So I can have a variable, right, called cats. I'm just going to put C for cat. And I'm going to say, hey, C for cat is going to point to the same place in memory as Mike Chang. Cool? These two things are going to point to the same block in memory. So if I make a change to Mike Chang, I'm actually making a change to cats as well. Are there any questions so far as to pass by reference?
And the reason why that's the case is because it's an object.
It is an object. Only objects are passed by reference. Everything else is considered a primitive. So Boolean, number, string, primitives. All right? They are passed by value. They are pointing to the same place in memory. So if I change it, both of the variables will be pointing to the same place in memory. So cats is pointing to memory slot 1, and Mike Chang, which is an exact assignment of cats, is pointing it to memory spot 1. So when I change Mike Chang and I ask what's the value of cats, it's going to give me what is at memory 1.
Which is why in our homework over the weekend, we had to create a new object if we wanted to maintain the original.
Correct. You must create a new object if you do not want to mutate the original object because of this pass by reference JavaScript amazingness. Cool? Great. Functions. Let's take a look. Did I say anything about functions, about what the type is? Oh. I can't do function? Or do I have to like make the full thing? No, it's all right. Type of function, there it was. Oh. I'm so stupid. It just did it. Did you see it? I'm missing something. But it comes back as function, right? As like as its own type. I don't know why. I just saw I was deleting. But either way, it comes back as function, right? Functions are special types of objects, just like arrays are special types of objects. So here, cool. I can have just a function right here, and it just says, I like pancakes. And all it does is console log pancake technology is truly incredible. What a time to be alive. Cool? So in Ruby, all you have to do is say, I like pancakes, just like this, and it will invoke and execute immediately for you. Here, if I do not put what I'm going to start calling the bananas, right, which are just these, they look like bananas to me. All right, the parentheses. So if I say bananas and it's annoying, just tell me, just by heavens, please stop saying that. But until I hear otherwise, I'm going to call it bananas. Is that cool? B-A-N-A-N-A-S. So without the bananas, I simply get the definition of the function. If I want to invoke or execute it, I have to put the bananas, right? Why is it that I still get undefined here? There is no return value. Here in Ruby land, you are so used to implicit returns. Everything you do, your def methods will always return the last line. It is very, very nice. If you do not return, you will get undefined. I'm just going to give you the heads up now. Please, console log everything. If you get undefined, just go, probably forgot the return statement. Okay? It's going to happen. You're going to laugh at yourself. I'm probably going to laugh at you because I'm laughing at old me. Because I actually knew me. I still do it. I just taught Ruby. It's hard jumping back and forth, and don't beat yourself up. It's okay. You're going to forget the return. You're going to forget it a lot. It's not a big deal. All right? Just don't get too frustrated. Just know why you're getting undefined. Cool? Any questions as to this sort of definition and the invoking? Right? Nothing. Something hard. Cool. In the same way that when I did like Mike Chang, do I still have it? Mike Chang, yes. I can simply add attributes to it, right? Like new attribute. And I can put like amazing, human being. Cool. And now I take a look at Mike Chang and I just added that. I like pancakes, right? And that's a function. I can add key values to it, right? Like, whoa. Oh no, embarrassing. Cool. Oh no, that's not what I'm looking for. That's not what I'm looking for either. Nope. There we go. There we go. Amazing. Cool. I just add attributes to these functions because functions are just objects. So if I wanted to, I could ask what .whoa is on I like pancakes. Cool? Great. A function expression. So there's two different ways to sort of define these functions. And that is I can have a function, right? And I can have like a fun function, just like this. And all it does is it console logs mad fun. No spaces, like a boss. Cool. I can also have a variable called mega fun function. And that is equal to a function. And all that's going to do is log. See that? Powerful. So I can do fun function, and it's the definition. And I can do mega fun function. And I can invoke either one. See that? Mad fun. Cool. There is a huge difference between taking a variable and then assigning it a function and naming your functions, and we will learn that later on. Cool? Just know that there's two ways to kind of reference this function. Functions must have some sort of reference if they are declared outside on like the global variable. So if I were to do like, hey, here's a function, not name it whatsoever, not assign it a variable, and simply go, does this work? Return work. Work, 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 work. And it doesn't like it. Are there any questions? Quick thumbs up on functions. Awesome.
Is it, sorry, I have one question.
Yeah.
Is there any, if I was putting a function inside something else, I would choose to put it in another function, not a variable. Is that like a best practice thing?
A function inside another function?
Instead of putting a function assigned to a variable, is there any differences?
There is going to be a big difference, and we're going to learn more about this afternoon. Scopes and closures. Cool. Good question. Great. We have an array here, right? An array can take numbers, strings, and objects, even all at once. Cool. Very similar to how it does in Ruby. I just want to point this out because it seems very intuitive to you, but if you're learning like C or like Java, like they do not like data types being mixed together. Cool. Awesome. We have type checking here. Look at this. Awesome. A lot of you are familiar with binding pry, yes? We have something called the debugger. And so what you could do is inside this code, right? If you put this %C, it will accept a CSS attribute. So if we take a look quickly. I know, fancy, fancy. Yeah. So here we could see that top down, left to right, my code is being executed. I can, however, drop something literally called the debugger. And only when my dev tools are open, see, look, nothing. But only when my dev tools are open will the debugger trigger. Cool? And it will literally pause my code. It will tell me exactly where I'm at in my code, and then I can go back to console and I can test my variables. Right? So if I had something like var, I don't know, variable, no, I don't want to do that. That's not right, but it's fine. Okay. No, I can't do it, man. Var, my var. You're gonna see this a lot in Stack Overflow because people are like me, extremely creative. Cool. So now I can reference what is my var in the same way that binding pry does. It's just like a tiny intro. The debugger is amazing, and it will give you a lot more information. And we'll walk through that in the next lecture. Are there any questions so far on just the absolute basics for JavaScript? Great. So the rest of this, something I need you to burn into your memory. Oh, I put a lot of like jokes and memes in here. Where is this? Okay. When you are looking at stuff, burn this into your memory. Cool? If you're looking up documentation, if I want to look up anything in JavaScript, please add MDN to your search. Like, if I were to just be like, how do I iterate an array? So I can just be like iterate through array. And I'm going to get a lot of weird things. If I just put MDN, it's going to help me out significantly in my search results. Cool? MDN, if you remember, very vaguely, on day 1 of Mod 2, is the Mozilla Development Network. These are the docs for JavaScript. This is the gospel truth. This is literally the Ruby docs for JavaScript. So if you're curious as to how something works, add MDN to all your JavaScript queries.
Do they sponsor JavaScript? Is
Yeah.
that why they own the docs?
Yeah.
So we shouldn't do Stack Overflow too much.
Oh yeah, I mean, those are great too, but I'm talking about like if you're looking at JavaScript, the fundamentals, how something works, yes. Add MDN. They will be very, very, very helpful as we move to Mod 3. Awesome. Are there any questions? Great, that's all I have for you.